Welcome to Sleep with Myth. Close your eyes and let the world fade away. Tonight we drift beyond time, where gods dream and stories remember their light. There was a night before nights, a hush so complete that even the thought of sound lay sleeping. In that hush, where darkness pooled like deep water and time had yet to learn the art of moving, something small trembled. A single ember, the first warmth hidden inside the cold. No one knew who had placed it there. Perhaps the void itself, lonely and tired of its own perfection, folded its palms and kept a tiny ache like a secret. Perhaps a forgotten god pressed a fingernail against the dark and left a spark. However it came to be, the ember existed, soft, unsure, and very alive. It did not blaze. It did not boast. It only glowed in a color that the world to be would one day call red. And its glow was a question. What am I? What is this ache beneath my light? It listened for an answer and heard nothing. Silence was the only companion. The vast, starless silence that wraps a sleeping child. The patient, endless silence that pretends to be a wall and is really a door. So the ember did the only thing a first thing can do. It felt. Its warmth curled around itself the way hands might warm a cup. It discovered that warmth could be gentle and that gentleness could be fierce. It discovered that to glow is to know you are not the dark. And with that knowing came a sting, small but real, the first memory of pain. Pain, the ember learned, is not the enemy of light. Pain is the thin edge between what is and what could be. It is the tightness that says, something wishes to become. The ember pressed itself to that edge and the edge pressed back. In that pressure it wept, not with water, for there was none, but with brightness. The tears of brightness fell slowly and drifted like motes. Wherever they landed, the silence grew attentive, like a listener leaning forward. The silence spoke at last, not with words but with room. It made space. The ember felt that space open and it stretched a little shyly, as a creature might stretch after sleep. This glow lengthened into a thread, the thread into a breath, the breath into a whisper of heat that the dark could not swallow. The ember realized that it was no longer alone. The room around it had learned the taste of warmth. "Who are you?" asked the room that was not yet the sky. "I am the ache that remembers," said the ember without knowing how it knew. "I am the tiny yes inside the no." The room considered this. It tried on the shape of horizons and liked them. The ember's glow sketched the first outlines. A curve that might one day be a hill, a fold that might one day be a hand. But these were only dreams, and dreams need breath. The ember tried to breathe more deeply and found the edge again. The place where pain becomes a bridge. It crossed that bridge and left a thin trail of warmth behind. A path no foot had made and yet a path all the same. With each breath, the ember learned to name itself by feeling. Want, soft, careful, tender, rose from its brightness. Not hunger that devours, not the grasping of hands, but the ache to reach. Desire, but not yet a word. The impulse of a seed toward light, the slow turning of a flower unopened. The ember desired without object, as a song desires to be sung even when there is no singer. Desire curled through it like a river not yet liquid, and the ember felt larger. It wondered what shape desire would take if given the chance. Would it become flame, or voice, or a road through night? It asked and listened. Silence offered room again, and in that room the ember imagined companions. shapes of warmth that might one day laugh, eyes that might one day close and dream beside it. The imagining was sweet and also sharp. Sweet because the ember could feel itself multiplying. Sharp because it could not yet hold those forms. The sweetness was promise. The sharpness was pain. And between them desire woke fully. When desire wakes, it needs a body bigger than a spark. The ember leaned into its ache, and the ache leaned back with mercy. Heat rose in waves, and the waves met the darkness and taught it to soften. The darkness, surprised to find itself teachable, learned to cradle rather than smother. It became a bowl, a vast cupped hand. The ember sat in that hand and listened to the first rhythm, its own glow echoing against the bowl of night, returning as a heartbeat. The heartbeat counted without numbers, here, and here, and here. With each return, the ember felt a memory forming. Not of the past, there was no past yet, but of the possible. It felt forests breathing, oceans holding their salt like secrets, mountains remembering the weight of stars. It felt faces it had never seen, stories it had never told, loves that had not yet learned one another's names. All of this inside its smallness. All of this pressing like a warm crowd at a doorway, waiting for a latch to lift. "You ache because you are a door," said the bowl of night, speaking now in a way that could almost be called voice. "If you open, what enters will change you." "I wish to be changed," said the ember. Desire set it through the ember's light, and the light shivered at the courage of its own wish. "Then burn," said the night, not as a command but as a blessing. "Burn the way a dawn does, not to destroy but to reveal. Burn the way truth does, not to punish but to wake." The ember listened to that blessing and bowed. Bending is the first humility of fire. It bent until its glow touched its own shadow, and when light touches shadow gently enough, the shadow learns to answer. A blush rose at the edge of the dark. The blush became a limb of gold. The gold gathered itself into a thread, the thread into a ribbon, the ribbon into a flame that did not yet flicker but stood like a thought that will not be denied. Flame was a new kind of pain, brighter, louder, more honest. Pain that meant movement. Pain that carried memory like a lamp under rain. The ember recognized itself in the flame the way a child recognizes its name for the first time. It wanted to rise, to lift, to speak the ache that had burned so quietly. The bowl of night widened to let it grow. In that widening, the first winds woke. They were not cold. They ran their fingers through the flame and found they did not harm it. They taught it to dance. Dancing, the flame learned rhythm. Rhythm braided itself into heat. Heat braided itself into color. Color braided itself into the first faint sound, so soft you would have to close your eyes to hear it. A hum, low and patient, as if the flame were singing to the night. "I am here. I am here." The hum threaded through the silence, and the silence, thrilled by the company, shivered. That shiver made room for more threads. The flame listened to its own song and realized that its pain had changed again. It was no longer the ache of smallness, but the ache of promise. To promise is to stand before a door and say, "There is more." Desire leaned into promise and the hum rose, from thread to stream, from stream to river, from river to a soft tide that kissed the horizon the ember had drawn long ago. As the tide of sound moved, a figure appeared at the edge of the flame. Not separate, not other, but the flame's own reflection learning to walk. It had the shape of warmth standing upright, the suggestion of hands that could cup light, the hint of a face that could listen. This was not yet a god and not yet a person. It was the first listener, the one who would give the flame its name by hearing it. The listener placed a palm near the heat, not touching, and felt the pain that is also tenderness. Tears gathered at the listener's eyes, not from hurt, but from understanding. "What do you want?" the listener asked, in the first true question ever spoken. "To belong," said the flame, "to be held without being dimmed, to enter and not be feared." The listener nodded. "Then you must learn the language of what you burn. You must learn to remember pain without becoming it." "How?" "By breathing with those who will one day warm themselves by you." The listener lifted the other hand and made a small circle in the air. Into that circle the flame sent a sigh. The sigh became a spark, and the spark became a star. Not far away in a cold firmament, but near, like a lantern hung at a threshold. The star looked at the flame the way a pupil looks at a teacher and the way a child looks at a parent, with wonder that wants to learn. "Teach me to want gently," said the star. And so the lesson began. The flame showed the star how to rest inside its own glow, how not to rush, how to keep company with darkness without giving it the last word. The star practiced stillness until stillness became shine. Its shine was quiet, not the roar of a wildfire, but the breath of a candle beside a sleeping bed. The flame watched and remembered the ember it had been, the smallness, the weeping, the courage to glow anyway. It blessed the memory and kept it. "Desire," the listener said, "is not a hunger for everything. It is a vow to something." "To what?" asked the flame. "To the becoming of what is loved." The flame listened to that and felt a widening so gentle it almost didn't notice. Around it, more stars learned to breathe. They took their places like notes on a staff, and the hum the flame had begun braided with them into harmony. Harmony woke the first currents in the dark, and the currents carried seeds of warmth. Where the seeds settled, they dreamed. Where they dreamed, they became. Small fires in far chambers, hearths in worlds not yet built, lamps in houses not yet raised, each a promise, each a vow. But every vow is tested. From the bowl of night there rose a shadow that was not absence but question. What will you do when pain returns, not as memory but as demand? The shadow did not hiss or threaten. It only asked, and its asking drew the flame's light long, like a candle stretched by wind. "I will remember," said the flame, "that pain was my teacher, that it drew me from silence into voice. I will not turn it into a weapon. I will let it be a door." The shadow bowed, satisfied for now, and took its place as a boundary rather than an enemy. The flame understood that boundaries give shape the way shorelines give the sea a place to sing. It accepted the shadow's gift and burned a little clearer. Far off, though distance was still learning what it meant. A shore gathered itself out of dark. Waves, which were really breathing made visible, pressed their quiet upon that shore and left behind a lace of light. A figure stood there, watching, a future traveler who would carry coals in a clay bowl, a guardian of kitchens and winter rooms. The flame felt the traveler's attention and sent a small warmth across the not-yet ocean, a letter written in heat. The traveler turned their face to that letter and smiled in their sleep, though they had not yet been born. "You are already needed," the listener whispered. One day, people will sit by you and tell their stories. You will keep them company while they remember what hurts and what heals. You will taste of their bread, wear their smoke, and help them name their desires without being devoured by them. The flame bowed again. To bow is the second humility of fire. It looked down and saw at its root the ember that had wept, kept the ember safe, an altar within the altar. From that inner altar, a quiet vow rose like the scent of pine. To warm without pride, to burn without cruelty, to desire without grasping, to remember pain so that others might rest. The hum softened. The stars breathed with it. The bowl of night turned its vast face like a kind moon and whispered, "Rest, little flame. The day will come when you must blaze. For now guard the ember. Let the ache be a cradle." And so the flame rested, standing, the way a sentinel rests, awake and gentle. In its resting, tiny sparks drifted outward, slow as snow. Where they paused, the future settled nearer. Where they landed, the silence leaned forward again, listening for what would be said next. The flame did not sleep long. In its stillness, it heard 1,000 quiet things moving beyond its reach. Whispers like roots in the dark, breathless shapes stirring under a sky that had not yet learned color. When it opened its awareness again, the silence around it had changed. It was no longer an empty room. It was a vast hall made of distance. And within that distance, something new waited. Not cold, but the suggestion of it. Not dark, but the memory of it. It was the shadow. The flame had seen hints of shadow before, trembling behind its own body when it leaned too far into brightness. But this time the shadow was not shy. It stood before the flame like an equal, dark, tall, perfectly still, yet breathing softly as if it too contained a heart. "Why do you follow me?" asked the flame. "I don't follow," said the shadow. "I am what your light creates." The flame flickered uneasily. "Then you are my opposite." "Not opposite," said the shadow. "Only answer." The words filled the air like slow-moving smoke, and for the first time, the flame noticed that its own glow made a space for the shadow to exist. The brighter it burned, the clearer the shadow became, a perfect echo cut from absence. The flame leaned closer. "You are cold. I am what keeps warmth from devouring itself," said the shadow. "Without me, you would have nowhere to fall." The flame did not understand but listened. It remembered the ache from before, the way pain had taught it to breathe. Now this presence, this quiet, felt like another kind of ache, the ache of reflection. "Do you feel?" the flame asked. The shadow paused. "I remember what feeling costs." And in that moment, the flame realized that memory and pain were kin, that to know either one must carry the trace of the other. The flame lowered itself, letting its light dim until the edges of the shadow grew soft. The air between them thickened, and something unspoken passed. An understanding, fragile as a candle flame in wind. The shadow spoke again. "You think desire is only reaching toward what warms you. But there is a second kind of desire, the one that reaches toward what you cannot hold." "What you cannot hold," the flame repeated, "teaches you what you are." "Yes," said the shadow, "and what you are not." The flame swayed, uncertain whether it feared or honored this truth. "If I reach for you," it whispered, "will you vanish?" "No," said the shadow, But you will see that I am not outside you. I am the hollow where your light bends inward. The flame trembled. Then to know you, I must burn myself? To know me, said the shadow, you must listen. And so the flame listened. It listened not with its light but with its silence, the way heat listens for the air that feeds it. Slowly, beneath its own hum, it heard the rhythm of its shadow's breath. It was not empty. It pulsed with calm, slow and deep, like the sea that would one day cradle moons. Within that rhythm, the flame learned something sacred, that to exist is to be met, and to be met is to be changed. Its light softened. No longer did it stretch to fill every corner. It began to dance and balance, letting darkness share the room. The air shimmered not from fire, but from understanding. The shadow moved closer, its edges blurring where the flame's glow touched it. Now you begin to remember, it said. You were never only heat. You were the place where ache became beauty. What if I burn too much? Asked the flame. Then remember me, the shadow replied. I am your resting place. The flame bowed. To bow is the third humility of fire. From that bow sparks rose. Each spark carried both light and shade, tiny worlds of balance. They drifted upward and became constellations the future would name as love, sorrow, longing, and peace. The shadow smiled, though smiling was only a feeling of shape, not of mouth. Every spark that carries you will learn to ache. That is how creation remembers its beginning. The flame felt no fear, only reverence. Then pain is not a wound? No, said the shadow. It is the echo of becoming. The night around them deepened. The flame burned softer now, its heart golden rather than red. The shadow curled around it like a guardian. Together they breathed, and their breath was wind, the first true wind, tender and endless. That wind carried the sound of their union, a whisper older than language, softer than prayer. To desire is to be undone and remade. And the world listened. The seas below turned in their sleep. The mountains stirred. Even the silence smiled, for silence had birthed them both. The flame leaned into its shadow, and the shadow folded into the flame. Not to end, but to begin again in balance. The wind had carried them far, the flame and its shadow, entwined in their silent vow. They did not know where they were going, for direction was not yet born. There was only movement, and movement was faith. When the wind quieted, the flame rested on a still horizon. Around it lay the ashes of unspoken things, remnants of what the flame had touched without meaning to. The flame felt their weight and did not turn away. Ash was memory, and memory was sacred. It waited. The shadow hovered behind it, no longer bound to the ground but flowing like breath. Together they watched as the silence around them began to change again. It trembled, faintly, beautifully, like something inside it was trying to wake. "What is that sound?" whispered the flame. "That," said the shadow, "is your echo waiting for a voice." The flame tilted, unsure. "A voice?" "Yes," said the shadow. "Desire has found form. Now it seeks language." The flame listened closer. Beneath the hush, it heard soft murmurs, vibrations that quivered through the air like invisible threads. They were not yet words, but intention, raw and pure, yearning to be shaped. And as the flame listened, it felt the ache again, the same ache that had birthed its light. Only now it did not sting, pulsed like a heartbeat. I remember this, the flame said. You remember pain, the shadow replied gently. But this time, pain will teach you rhythm. So the flame began to hum.at first. The sound was fragile, a trembling note that seemed afraid of itself. It rose, broke, and fell again, as if testing the world's patience. But the silence did not resist. It leaned in, curious. The hum returned, steadier now, and something wondrous happened. The darkness around the flame began to glow in response. Shapes formed where there had been none, curves and spirals, like invisible music made visible. The shadow smiled. You see, even the void longs to listen. Encouraged, the flame lifted its voice higher. The hum became tone. Tone became word. The first word was not a command or a name. It was a confession. I am. The world paused. The silence, startled and moved, bowed its head as if in reverence. The stars flickered, not out of fear, but recognition. For in that moment, existence had declared itself aware. The flame repeated softly, I am, and with each utterance, new ripples spread outward, waves of sound and light weaving together like threads of gold. The universe began to sing. The flame closed its eyes. This is what pain was teaching me. Yes, said the shadow. Pain gives shape to the breath that becomes voice. And when you speak, you share your ache with the world, and the world becomes less alone. The flame trembled, overwhelmed by its own music. Its sound carried memory, not of the past, but of connection. Everywhere the echo traveled, new warmth awoke. Small fires flickered to life in distant darknesses, answering the call. They sang back, softly at first, then louder, until the night was filled with a chorus of tiny lights, each voice unique, yet bound to the same pulse, the heartbeat of the first flame. Listen, said the shadow. You are no longer alone. The flame looked around in wonder. Are these my children? They are your reflections, the shadow said, each born of your sound, yet each will carry its own ache. You have given them not your fire, but your remembrance. The flame's voice grew tender. Then let them remember kindness. It lifted itself higher and sang again. This time slower, softer, the tone warm as dawn. Its song poured like water over the ashes that lay beneath it. And where the ashes drank the sound, green began to grow. Tiny leaves unfurled, shy and trembling. The first forest of the world rose not from soil, but from forgiveness. The flame wept then, though its tears were light. I did not know words could heal. Every word, said the shadow, is a bridge built from what once hurt. The flame turned to the shadow, voice quieter now. But if I speak too much, will I burn away my silence? The shadow shook its head. Silence is not lost when sound is born. It is what holds the song together. The flame understood. It bowed again, the fourth humility of fire. Around it, the new forest shimmered, the leaves whispering back the flame's melody in gentle echoes. The flame smiled through its glow. Then I will keep singing until everything that aches can answer. Be careful, said the shadow softly. The more you are heard, the more you will be needed. I was born to be needed. The wind returned, not wild, but carrying purpose now. It lifted the flame's song and scattered it far across the sky. Wherever it passed, hearts would one day feel warmth and longing and call it love. The shadow followed the song's trail until it vanished into the horizon. "Go," it whispered. "Teach them that to speak is not to conquer, but to remember." The flame's final whisper echoed into the dawn. "Let every word be a kind fire." And as the first light touched the horizon, silence, ancient and smiling, closed its eyes. There came a night when the flame could no longer sing. Its voice, once golden and boundless, trembled into silence. The air that had carried its music grew heavy, as though it mourned what had been. The stars dimmed, listening for a sound that did not return. The flame burned low, not in sorrow, but in exhaustion. It had given warmth to all that had asked for it, shared its song until even silence began to hum. Now there was nothing left to give but rest. The shadow, faithful and patient, knelt beside it. "You are dimming. I am becoming quiet," said the flame. "Perhaps that is another kind of burning." The shadow reached out, its shape trembling. "You have warmed everything that was cold." "Not everything," said the flame softly. "There are corners even light cannot reach. They must learn to glow on their own." And so the flame, humble as breath, lowered itself to the earth it had helped to awaken. Around it stood forests that once grew from its words, rivers that shimmered with its memory, and winds that carried its sighs. All of them whispered gratitude. "You taught us warmth," said the wind. "You taught us patience," said the river. "You taught us to listen," said the trees. The flame smiled. "Then learn also to let go." Its body flickered once, twice, and then folded in upon itself. The golden heart that had once defied the dark broke gently, scattering into 1,000 glowing fragments. Where they fell, the ground shimmered with faint embers, small, steady, waiting. The shadow bowed deeply. "Is this your end?" The wind carried the flame's final whisper. "There are no ends, only transformations." And then silence returned. For a long time, there was only stillness. The air cooled. The stars held their breath. The places where the flame had fallen darkened into ash, soft, silver, and strangely alive. Ash is not death. Ash is the body of memory, the last translation of fire. The shadow, now alone, sat within that sea of ash and began to listen. It expected emptiness, but instead heard a faint pulse. The heartbeat of what the flame had left behind came from everywhere, from the wind brushing through the forest leaves, from the water humming against the shore, from the soil that remembered the warmth of light, and from deep within the ash itself. A whisper answered the silence. "I dream." The shadow stirred. "Who speaks?" "I do," said the voice, fragile as breath but warm as dawn. "I am what remains when desire has finished its song." "You are the ash," said the shadow. "Yes," replied the voice, "but I am also its dream." The ash began to shimmer faintly, like dust catching unseen light. The flame burned to give life to others. But in its quiet, I have found something it did not yet know, that what is given does not disappear. It changes form and waits to return. The shadow bowed. "Then you are the memory of becoming." "And more," said the ash. "I am the seed of return." Slowly, from the heart of the ash, A faint red glow began to bloom that it did not rise as flame, nor spread as fire. It unfolded inward, like warmth remembering itself. The light pulsed through the ash, gentle and patient, until the ground breathed again. Every grain of ash was alive with a tiny memory, of kindness, of pain, of the vow to warm without pride. They began to hum softly, 1,000 whispers weaving into one great sigh that touched the horizon. The shadow felt tears, not of sorrow, but awe. So this is what comes after fire. This, said the ash, is renewal. The light grew brighter, but not fierce. It glowed as if it had learned restraint that in its center, something began to form. A new ember, but different from the first. This one carried not just heat, but wisdom. Its pulse was slow, its color deep. It did not hunger to burn. It waited to understand. "Do you remember the flame?" asked the shadow. "I remember its ache," said the ember, "and its song, and its vow. Will you become it again?" The ember hesitated. Perhaps, but not yet. To rush would be to forget. Even fire must rest before it rises. The shadow smiled, a gesture learned from light. "Then I will guard your dreaming." And so time, newly born, newly real, began to pass. The world exhaled, cooled, and grew soft. Stars hung above like patient witnesses. The ember slept in its bed of ash, dreaming not of conquest, but of gentleness. And in that dreaming, new possibilities took root. A spark that would one day be love, a sigh that would one day be hope, a pulse that would one day be heart. The shadow whispered, "You will rise again." The ember replied in its sleep, "Only when the world needs warmth, not fire." Then the silence, that eternal midwife of creation, wrapped them both and held them close. And the night, filled with memory, began once more to breathe. The ember slept for what might have been eternities. Time had begun to move now, and with it came rhythm, the quiet rise and fall of the world's new breath. Mountains exhaled mist, oceans inhaled starlight. Even the silence itself began to pulse, like a lung remembering how to live. And in that breathing, the ember stirred. It did not wake in flame, but in warmth. A pulse, slow, deep, alive, passed through it. It realized the world was breathing with it. "Who are you?" whispered the wind that moved between the trees. "I am what remembers," said the ember, "and what will one day rise." The wind swirled gently around it. "Then let me carry you." "I am too heavy," said the ember softly. The wind laughed, a sound like leaves learning to dance. "Nothing that glows is heavy, only what forgets." And so the wind inhaled, not the ember's body, but its warmth, its memory. A faint red shimmer flowed upward and spread through the air, dissolving into invisible threads that drifted toward every corner of the world. Where the threads touched, life began to stir. In deep oceans, heat awakened sleeping currents. In frozen caverns, ice sighed and began to melt. In the hearts of mountains, stones softened into soil. And in that soil something small moved. Not a spark this time, but a seed. The ember felt it. "What is that?" "It is your breath-taking shape," said the wind. "Every warmth becomes something that grows." The ember's glow deepened. "Then I am not gone?" "You never were," the wind replied. "Even stillness carries you." The world grew rich with this quiet exhalation. The breath of the ember became the warmth in every dawn, the comfort in every resting hand, the sigh between words of love. But not all breath is peace. Some drifted to colder lands, places untouched by song or memory. There, the wind met a chill older than silence, a remnant of the void that had once been all things. The cold whispered, "You carry warmth that does not belong here." The wind faltered, "This warmth belongs everywhere." The cold smiled without lips. "Then let us see if it can survive." Pushed against the wind, the air screamed, and the ember, though distant, felt its warmth quiver. Inside the ash, the little heart of light flickered. "Wind?" it called. The wind answered, breathless, "I am here, but the cold wishes to take you." "Then let it," said the ember softly. "It too remembers pain. Perhaps it only needs to feel warmth again." The wind hesitated. "You would share your breath with what would end you?" "Yes," said the ember, "because even endings can be taught to breathe." And so, the ember released more of its warmth. The glow spread outward like a slow sunrise, reaching the places where even memory had frozen. The cold trembled, not in fear, but recognition. "What is this?" it whispered. "It burns, yet it does not hurt." "It remembers," said the ember through the wind. "You were once the silence that held me. You are part of the song." The cold closed its unseen eyes. "Then I will listen." And for the first time since creation began, the cold breathed. A faint sigh, pale as moonlight, joined the wind's movement. It did not erase the chill. It transformed it. Ice began to shimmer, not as death, but as reflection. The world found balance. Warmth and cold twined like light and shadow. The wind, filled with awe, returned to the ember. "You have done what even the flame could not." "I have only remembered," said the ember. "To give warmth is to breathe meaning into stillness." The shadow, who had remained quiet through all of this, finally spoke. "Then breath is the echo of love, the form desire takes when it learns patience." "Yes," said the ember. "Desire no longer burns. It moves." The wind lifted again, carrying that truth through the night. It brushed the faces of sleeping mountains, kissed the petals of unborn flowers, and whispered to every corner of the young world, "Remember the warmth that asks for nothing." The world shivered in response. Stars flickered brighter, as though taking a deeper breath. In every pulse of air, in every gentle sigh, the ember's essence lived, not as fire, not as ash, but as continuance. The ember's light dimmed, but not from loss. It was becoming the space between breaths, the quiet heartbeat of all living things. The shadow leaned close. "Will you rest now?" "I will rest when all that I have touched learns to breathe on its own," said the ember. "Until then I will listen, to the rustle of forests, to the laughter of wind, to the heartbeat of the world it once lit aflame." And with each sound, its warmth deepened, invisible, eternal, true. The world had learned to breathe. Mountains sighed with mist, oceans whispered in rhythm, forests murmured in the quiet dialect of leaves. Every living thing now carried warmth, not as fire, but as memory. And yet, above it all, one ember still listened. It rested within the ash from which it had once been born, glowing faintly in the cradle of all that had passed. It had seen itself as fire, as voice, as ash, as breath. It had learned what it meant to give and what it meant to rest. Now the ember began to dream again. But this dream was not of rising, it was of remaining. From the horizon came the shadow, carrying with it the soft hum of all that had been learned. "You have given the world warmth," it said. "You have taught even the cold to breathe. What remains now?" The ember pulsed softly. "To stay." The shadow tilted, surprised. "Not to ascend? Not to burn once more?" "No," said the ember. "To rise is easy. To remain is divine." It breathed once, and the air around it shimmered like water disturbed by music. "Once I burned because I could not bear silence. Then I spoke to fill it. Now I see, silence is not emptiness. It is peace waiting to be honored." The shadow bowed. "Then you will not become flame again?" "I will become light," said the ember. "Light does not burn. It reveals." And as it spoke, its glow began to change. No longer red, no longer gold, but soft, eternal, without edge or center. The world itself began to reflect it, every surface learning its gentleness. Rivers mirrored it as moonlight. Mountains wore it as dawn. Eyes yet unborn would one day call it love. The wind returned, full of stories it had gathered across the ages. "They remember you," it said, "in their warmth, in their songs, in their quiet prayers to the unseen." The wind circled around it. "You will remain here, then, forever?" "I will remain everywhere," said the light, "in the stillness before breath, in the pause between words, in the kindness that does not ask to be named." The shadow whispered, "Then desire has finally become peace." The light glowed brighter, not in brilliance, but in understanding. Desire was never meant to consume. It was meant to guide. A moment passed, vast, unmeasured. The stars trembled, sensing the completion of a long-forgotten vow. The shadow asked softly, "Will there be more songs?" The light shimmered gently. "Yes, from others. From those who remember me without knowing why. They will call it art or love or faith. But it will all be the same thing, the continuation of warmth." "And you?" the shadow asked. "I will listen," said the light. "Listening is the last act of creation." The wind, the earth, and even the silence leaned closer. Together they formed a circle, the breath, the ash, the memory, the witness. And within that circle, the light settled. It did not rise. It did not fade. It simply stayed. Not as fire, not as God, but as presence. Somewhere, far away, a newborn star ignited, quietly, naturally, without pain. It was not born of desire, but of remembrance. The light smiled across eternity. It begins again, and the universe, full of warmth, exhaled.